not showing you the slides with doing the other thing. Let's see if we can present here. Okay, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So today's conversation is about cognitive services in computing, and I'm calling it a not so definite presentation. And that's because there are a lot of different things. It's really an emerging field. And so one of the great things about this field is um, it has so much relationship to big data. It's really possible because of big data in AI and machine learning. And so now we have the ability to set up what's called a basic cognitive system with every single, oops, with every single aspect of what a brain can do on a basic level. So the goal of a cognitive system is to build intelligent machine-based learning applications to interact with humans and focus on vision, speech, language, and knowledge. And with that comes the ability to service a lot of different audiences. And one of those audiences we'll talk about today is neurodiverse people. And so I'm not a big believer in a bunch of slides. So I'm going to show you a few slides and then we're going to drive around a little bit. And then we're going to talk to Mark about his work in neurodiversity and how it works in his organization with Autocon. So this is one example of a diagram that kind of explains cognitive computing. That is this is from actually Brown University, where it's a combination of computational sciences, human cognitive science, and systems neuroscience. And they happen to call it ICON. To go another level, it also has a relationship to human-centered interface, human-centered interfaces, where you have a combination of cognitive science with ethnography, sociology, design, engineering, language pathologies, security, psychology. All these things kind of come together to say, how do we interact with this human in a more effective way? And then there's the messiness. And I love this diagram because this is the real world of how do we deal with humans in a better way, right? And we've seen the pluses and the minuses of the previous industrial revolution. Now we're on this so-called fourth industrial revolution, and we have this nexus where we sit in the middle of all these different disciplines, and that has a lot to do with cognitive computing too, right? So some systems involve mathematics, some don't. Some systems involve management information sciences, some don't. Some involve design, some involve philosophy, some involve medicine, some involve biology, ecology. The point is that to be human involves all these areas, and we need to look at the nexus. How do we explore the nexus of being human? So there are a few different things, sort of applications out there. So just to start from the most basic level, this is actually a presentation from Microsoft. I think I could share my sound too. Let's see, hopefully this will work. Can you guys hear that video? Did you guys hear that video?
No.
No. Okay. I think there is a way to share sound. See, there we go. All right.
Azure Cognitive Services are AI capabilities that drive business impact through rich end-user experiences. With just a few lines of code, you can bring computer vision to the factory floor or give e-commerce experiences a human touch. You can empower companies to spot anomalies in real time, hospitals to extract critical data from patient records, and people across the world to communicate with each other. You can deploy AI where you need it most, from the cloud to the intelligent edge, using the programming languages you already know. No machine learning experience necessary. To get started, simply explore our services and begin creating intelligent solutions that meet your business and end user needs.
Okay, so the basics of cognitive services that as they're presented right now are that it's low code. It's focused on making sure that we have certain benefits in mind. And so we have certain things with cognitive service examples like decision making. So, how to put together, how to find different anomalies, how to moderate content, how to do metrics. All of these things require with no actual coding experience. We have language services where we can actually translate things back and forth. We have speech services, speech to text, speech recognition, or speech translation. And then we have vision. So we have face recognition, which everybody knows the good, bad thing that's happening out there, computer vision and customized vision, image recognizers, form recognizers, things like that. So when we talk about cognitive services, that's essentially what we're talking about. There are four main examples that are out there, and we'll share this article with you, which are from Apple. They have a system that is a core ML that's out there where you can use services based on your friends in images. You've seen where they suggest words that you might want to say. That's considered a cognitive service. So you're really already using a lot of this stuff. It was just now going into the next level. When you look at a cognitive service, it essentially is just an application layer that sits on top of other application layers that then communicate with your app. So with Apple's Core ML, it's one of many services. You can stack services together. You can put different things in place in order to power your applications, and then inform those applications using big data. So, big data, for example, in this case means natural language processing or the data about images. So, training data about how images work and what those images mean to your particular application are a big part of cognitive computing. Another example, obviously, is with Amazon Alexa. And there are a number of AI services with, again, recognition, text to speech, voice and text bots. If you have any of these devices, you're already doing cognitive computing. There are some more advanced ones. For example, there's a Amazon call center, which is almost entirely a robot that talks to you and services your needs in a call center. There are no human beings involved. And that's called Amazon Connect. So there are a number of those. And then Google, as we know, have many of these types of cognitive services with video intelligence, vision intelligence, speech intelligence, natural language processing, translation. And then Microsoft, which we just saw the video for, has a whole suite of vision, speech, language, knowledge, and Bing APIs that allow you to communicate with your audience more effectively using machines versus human labor or human processing. And there are just tons and tons and tons of these examples. So if you're interested in any of these fields are what are emerging together and being called cognitive services. And there are lots of enterprise versions where, so for example, Progress, they help you make complex decisions using automation and business rules. Some of you who are in bigger corporations may be familiar with that. With companies like I always say their name wrong, and they just I think they also have a number of more specific APIs around vision. So, for example, it's not just any object. They have product recognition APIs, product type recognition APIs. They have APIs that recognize freshness. They have APIs that recognize color, shape, and size. They have liquid capacity recognition, which I think is ultra fascinating. And they also recognize for retailers, they recognize what's on the shelf, what's missing. So those are things that are more getting specific. So we're getting a little more advanced now with different practitioners. So there's kind of the general basis with the biggest tech companies, and then the smaller companies specialize in particular things. So each one has different knowledge matching, different language matching, and different speech matching algorithms. And so the world is sort of becoming this catalog and recipe of algorithms that you can mix and match and put together so that you have kind of like little mini brains running around and helping do things, right? In the best of all worlds, right? We know there's some, we still have to work on some of the code, but in the best of all worlds, that's what it's focused on. And then we have things where, you know, we can recognize tickets, not so sexy, not a lot of images, but basically you can recognize how incident tickets need to work. The printer's broken, the printer's not working, those sort of things and hardware. But then there are more complex applications, and that's where we get into things like neurodiversity. So just to give you a quick overview, this is not my presentation, but I just want to give you a quick overview of what neurodiversity means, or one example of what neurodiversity is. In particularly, this is traced first in 1993 was sort of considered the origin of neurodiversity with Jim Sinclair. And there have been since a series of different books and publishings and a lot of different sites and organizations like Marks, and actually some of the work that Data 360 does around neurodiversity have emerged over the last few years. The goal of neurodiversity is that the brain is a rainforest, and you can use different ways. You can detect cultural values, or say cultural values dictate disorders. And success basically means adapting to the environment and changing the environment. So that's where the cognitive computing can come in and help people who are neurodiverse. And so the idea is to help ensure the thriving of a child or an adult in modifying the environment so that there's a chance for success. And so computing can actually begin, we can take all these different algorithms and all these different APIs and morph them in such a way that we can start addressing and changing the environment so that we can have strength awareness, we can create positive role models, create assistive technologies, strength-based learning strategies, different resource networks, and that is a lot of what Mark's work is about. For those of you who don't know what neurodiverse means, it includes people who have autism spectrum disorder. And in the positive light, we have a gift for detail, enhanced perpetual functioning, and mostly in the, terms of systems and things like that. So a lot of people on the ASD spectrum are very successful in corporate America, and a lot of savant abilities and different special interests. Learning disabilities like dyslexia are also considered neurodiverse. So people who have strong spatial intelligence, they're 3D thinkers, they have entrepreneurial proclivities, they're holistic thinkers, and they have a mechanical aptitude. And then ADHD, they're hunters. They learn by moving around. Warning signs are actually creative traits in the positive of affirmation of the disorder. And they excel at novelty seeking, and they have a lot of playfulness. And so you can look at each disorder as a positive or a negative. So you can say, instead of saying they're distractible, you can say they can put their attention on many things. Instead of saying they're impulsive, they respond quick to stimuli. Instead of saying hyperactive, you can say they're constantly on the move. So the goal is to transform that into how to adapt the environment so that they can display their strengths and get help and resources where they're not as strong. Same with ADHD, right? There's a creative person versus a child with ADHD. So we can say they're creative, they're vital, or they have ADHD, they're hyperactive. You can say they're distractible, again, divergent mind, same thing. If they're hyper focused, they're passionate. So each one of these things we can begin to deal with. And so um, we need to look at each of the characteristics in a very specific way in order to help people. And this applies not just across these type of disorders, but across many different things that people do and humans do. And so we can start to detect these things successfully using the very same APIs that we use to just do translation or other more mundane things. We can also look at how to design items for neurodiverse populations. So, for example, there's different colors and different spectrums. There's actually a full PDF, which I will share with you guys about all the different things that you can do to help design for neurodiversity, not just for AI, but in general. So in terms of, color usage, writing in plain language, how you construct the text, how you use buttons, there's different screen readers, and things like that. The same with uh, or designed for use of people who use screen readers. There's different guidelines for that. There's also different guidelines for people who have low vision. Those are also considered low neurodiverse. Again, dyslexia, people with physical or motor disabilities also get included in neurodiversity. So people, making sure that there are large clickable actions, make sure there's right spacing and all that good stuff. So the APIs plus these designs are actually what make a neurodiverse application actually work. And then again, with other disabilities, anxiety is also considered part of neurodiversity and emotional mental disorders. And so there are actually a lot of principles around accessibility. So there are many, many guides about that, but we'll share this one so you can see how they work. And then I think that will lead me over to Mark to talk about his work with Autocon. So I would love, Mark, if you could give a little bit of an introduction about what you're about and what your background is and how you got into this whole neurodiversity cognitive computing business.
You betcha. You betcha. So let's start at sperm and egg, shall we? I was born, I was sperm and egg, and then born an autistic individual, though I didn't know for 46 years. And nobody else knew either. Nobody pointed at me and said, Mark, you're unique in certain ways. You have these certain strengths, these certain weaknesses, and they're coupled, and it's called autism. Of course, if you look at the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for diagnosing certain psychological conditions, it only has criteria for the weaknesses. Curious. The strengths of autistic people, which you were pointing out earlier, are not there. Likewise, the same is true for ADHD, which I only more recently, about 2 months ago, discovered that I have. And that too can be looked at in the same way from a strengths and weaknesses perspective, because they're also coupled. And so there you have it, the sort of medical model of all of those things in the DSM-5 is what's described there. There's nothing positive that's diagnosable in that manual. And so the social model then, and I'm going to push forward in a moment and talk about Autocon, but the social model, which Autocon also adopts, is more inclusive of the strengths. So in short, if you think about every human being or cognitive service as having a SWOT model, okay? Not SWAT team, SWAT, but SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, all of those portions of that acronym are relevant to all human beings and systems. So with respect to those that are neurodivergent, like me, we tend to share certain strengths, tend to share certain weaknesses. But the point is, if we all have a certain SWOT model, then there are certain opportunities for us and certain threats as well. That's the O and the T. And so think about all four of those from the perspective of not just the human brain, but also the systems that are meant to, in many cases, emulate the human brain, or in other cases, be superior to the human brain. After all, the human brain doesn't have quite the clock cycles, shall we say, of a massive cluster of thousands of computers. So with that said, I'd like to talk about Autocon. What the heck is Autocon? It is a mashup of two words, autistic and consulting. So yes, all of our people are autistic. Some have other conditions as well that, that Marie talked about, other neurodivergent conditions. And many are gifted, many are savants, and so on. But we hire only autistic people and for consulting. So we have 4 spheres software, data, including, of course, big data, but we don't discriminate, so little data is fine too. So software, data, information security, and operations. Sort of call it what you will, DevOps, administration, any of those words are totally applicable to that 4th sphere. So that's our space. And you know, you might think, well, okay, you're a consulting company. You have autistic folks. So what? There are a million consulting companies out there. Well, there's a statistic published by JP Morgan Chase that is one of the reasons why we exist. And that is that autistic people are statistically 48% faster, and the study here used software engineering as the baseline for these stats, 48% faster and up to 92% more productive. And so, of course, many would joke and say, well, that's because their hands are on the keyboard, their heads are down, and they're not socializing. Well, there's some truth to that, for sure. Many autistic people are not so interested in hanging out at the water cooler and talking about the latest basketball game or what have you. So with that said, our folks are on average sort of statistically that. So our customers get sort of more bang for the buck. But that too is not really why we exist. Why we exist has to do with being the consulting company on both sides of this double-sided marketplace, where you have autistic people on one side, and there's a very sad statistic there. Whether you trust the US statistic or the UK statistic or some other country's statistic that they've published, but the stats vary between about 80 and 85% of autistic people are unemployed or underemployed. So I know a candidate who has yet to get a job at Autocon. We have yet to find a match of a project for him. He has an 185 IQ, has a PhD, and rakes leaves for a living, and other such odd jobs. Why is this true? Well, it's because human biases filter him out of the hiring processes. But we hire folks like this person, and we'd like all autistic folks who are on this call, as well as those who are, to apply if you're in technology. So now back to this double-sided marketplace, and I'm going to shut up in just a second, maybe open it up for questions. The other side of this double-sided marketplace is our customer. Now, what do we offer the customer? Well, it's not just that statistic, 48% faster, up to 92% more productive, but rather it's two different things. One is experiential learning. So here's the thing, autistic people have been practicing their whole lives to learn how to communicate better with non-autistic people. But non-autistic people haven't spent their whole lives studying how to communicate better with autistic people. And so the experiential learning and the aha moments that our customers have, it's mind-blowing. Can't even see that because of my background, but right? And so that experiential learning results in the second benefit, a jump that management goes through to true leadership. And by jump, I mean yet another acronym. This is JUMP. Just like when you jump physically, you sort of hunch down and then you spring up. Well, it starts with a down, a reduction in judgment. So those human biases I spoke of earlier, reducing those allows the manager to become a true leader and actually maybe hire that oddball that applied that might be autistic. Yes, and yes, I can say oddball because I'm an oddball. And the next thing is an increase. So like I said, the first one starts with a decrease, getting into that athletic position to launch into true leadership. The next one is an increase in understanding. I mean, very few of the managers that interact with our staff actually have a good understanding of autism. Almost all of them think of Rain Man or, maybe their sister's son who has a lot of support needs and maybe even is nonverbal, perhaps. So whatever it is that comes into the mind, it's probably not a complete picture, because once you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met just one. And each person has varying support needs. So with that said, that increase in understanding is just this big aha moment. And that ends up resulting in the M and the P, okay? An increase in mindfulness. After all, whoever is appearing before you, whether this is in an interview or whether this is at a party or wherever, that person before you, you don't know what's going on for them. Likewise, from a cognitive services perspective, until you really truly know what that system is capable of and you know it well, be mindful of its edge conditions, its performance, its various aspects that may or may not perform as well as actual human beings. And indeed, be careful in cognitive services, cognitive computing, AI, and all the rest of these terms. Be careful because they too can take on the same biases of human beings. We've all heard about AI systems that have made terrible mistakes. Some of them that try to detect human beings having trouble with people of different color. There's some maybe bias involved. So mindfulness is a characteristic of human beings that have a very high level of awareness, okay? That something might be happening for this other entity, whether that's a computer system or a human being. Our ability to understand their universe is minuscule. And finally, an increase in patience, okay? As with computer systems, all of you know, need a bit of patience to program them, to maintain them. and so on, so too do you need to have a great deal of patience with human beings so that you can make that jump to true leadership. So these are quotes. I created that acronym via quotes from our customers. And so I did promise that I'd shut up. This is a good place to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So in terms of people on the line who are interested in building systems for autistic people, or building, say we get rid of the dreaded ATS system and we replace it with something else. How do you recommend that they start building out a way to capture these different types of this neurodiversity in different ways of being? What do you think is, from your client's perspective, how have you seen them adapt systems to making it work better for different populations?
So there's sort of the HCI aspect, that human computer interaction. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other thing is human processes. So for example, one of the things that we are able to achieve in our customer organizations is an agenda for every meeting. Just point blank, autistic people very much appreciate understanding what the point of the meeting is, what the purpose is, what all of the agenda items are, because structure matters to autistic people a great deal. And understanding, why am I actually attending that meeting? Should I attend that meeting? Should I prepare for that meeting? It's a critical thing for many autistic people. Some are okay with ambiguity, but most not really as much. So with that said, the benefit to all is massive. While many non-autistic people are okay with ambiguity and attending a meeting with a completely blank description, they too, even though they're okay with it, they too appreciate having that structure there. Makes everything much more clear. And of course, from an expectation setting perspective, they say that almost every upset person is upset because there's a mismatch in some expectation. And so another thing that we're able to do is create a meeting environment where all of the lines are muted unless you're talking. You see, many autistic people have sensory issues. And so if there's a dog barking over in that box and someone is, eating in that box and forgot to mute over there, and they're drinking or, yelling at their kid, it can actually translate to pain. So that auditory sensory input can actually be pain. And of course, everyone else appreciates that, even if they don't have these issues, because then they're able to focus on the speaker better. So that meeting culture is another thing we're able to do, transform that. And the list goes on and on and on, associated with those human processes. But when it comes to hiring, that's the big one, because interviewing needs to change forever. I could probably go on for probably 10 or 15 minutes about interviewing, why autistic people are filtered out of most interview processes, but I won't. Just suffice it to say that talent assessment processes, whether it's interviewing or let's say someone got in the door who's autistic, that person may not be promoted. So promotions, layoffs, firing, all of those things are influenced by our human biases.
All those have to be reinvented.
Exactly.
Fun. Okay, I think we have some questions. Bob.
And you're muted.
And I was muted. Yeah. Fascinating stuff. I had no idea. This is just great information. So I'm a career and communications coach, and I happen to have an autistic client who's about 29. And we've been working for a while. And honestly, it's heartbreaking trying to like connect in on some heartbreaking because I know how much he criticizes himself. And one of the things we work on is how to catch that saboteur thought and stop it and turn it around to be positive. And so, I use different techniques, neuro-linguistic programming, and lately positive intelligence. And I was just wondering if you knew about the service in Silicon Valley called Evo Libri, Jan Johnston Tyler. Do you happen to know her? That's to Mark or Marie. No, okay.
No.
So she's been in this business of coaching and mentoring and helping mostly young adults, teenagers to young adults who are on the spectrum with socializing and getting work and keeping your job. It's hugely important in my family. We're neurodiverse. Uh, and I have this love-hate thing with the DSM too, because labels help you understand, but then you get stuck with it. So like I figured out early on through research that my daughter had dyslexia, and we intervened and got a different reading and spelling system. So that's no problem. She just graduated Phi Beta Kappa. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But we didn't know until high school that she also had ADD, basically. So then that was another intervention. That's one of the ways that I found the woman at Evo Libri. But what comes with this stuff, as you guys probably know, is anxiety and depression. It's such a mix of things. And I'm so optimistic that we're getting more aware of how different all of our minds work. And we just try to let go of these assumptions. But
Yeah.
this is great stuff. So thank you.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Yeah, and getting systems to support those differences, right, and include them as much as possible. So thank God we have now the computer systems that can actually handle that too.
And I totally agree about the interview process, because even for neuronormal people, interviewing is about the worst way to get the best match for the job. It's not a very good technique or system at all.
Horrible.
And I can coach people to do well in it, but it's really not the best way for the team and the company to get the right person.
We don't interview at Autocon. We evaluate SCAMP, SKAMP, skills, knowledge, abilities, mindsets, and personal characteristics
Cool.
without interviewing.
Great. You should pass that on. Is that in the PDF by any chance? Your methods.
It's a little bit of our, I'm not sure if it's secret, but that's our sauce that we also can help teach our clients. But it's very basic. I mean, if you just thought about it for a minute, you'd figure out how to assess SKAMP without interviewing.
Great.
Erica has her hand raised.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question actually with your consulting services and stuff, because I saw something probably about a year and a half ago of someone else who's placing neurodiverse candidates. And I was wondering, do you do anything from a technology perspective to help coach them as they're working there and help build their skills and stuff like that?
Thanks for asking that question, because it's something that I left out. So I think we're the only, though I could be wrong, company on the planet that's in consulting that has such a high overhead as part of the business. So we have 2 individuals per one who are supporting the consultant. Now, we believe actually that this model of doing business works for all companies, not just those who hire exclusively autistic people to do consulting. So I believe that all companies should adopt a model where every single human being, regardless of neurotype, deserves two types of support. One is related to the hard skills, knowledge, and abilities, mindsets, and personal characteristics. That person is typically the direct manager. Makes sense, right? Most of the people you've reported to in your life are really pretty good at the skills, knowledge, and abilities, especially. But often technology managers aren't the most emotionally intelligent. Okay. You know that, I know that. And so a very highly emotionally intelligent second support in the form of soft knowledge, skills, abilities, mindsets, and personal characteristics is provided. And so what if every company on the planet, every organization had two types of support for every person? After all, your direct manager, whoever that is, you might have a conflict. Who do you go to? Well, of course, you go to your job coach, your soft skills support. Or you don't know how to advocate for a raise. Who do you go to? You go to your job coach. You had an issue with a coworker. Sometimes you can go to your direct manager for that, but other times you might fear that they might fire you instead. So instead, once again, you go to your job coach. And so I don't know why, businesses haven't been doing this all along. It takes a company that thinks different. Oh, wait, that's Apple. Okay, how about English? Thinks differently. Huh? See what I did there? I'm autistic, so, I actually paid attention to the difference between different and differently. But hey, back to the point. We think differently about how to support each other. So from a servant leadership perspective, then, I am the technical mentor and coach, and I serve each of our staff members that way. And then we have a person named Kelly and another person named Reshma who does the same from the soft skills side. And they are experts in autism, master's level or higher in autism studies. And of course, also, education, therapy, and so on kind of background.
Do you think it takes training HR people about the differences, or is there a shorter way to having them become sensitive to the differences? Like, what do you think is the driver of, how do you think this change can be driven from a computing standpoint and from a organizational standpoint?
So I have a, did you want to interject someone? I thought I
I
heard.
see Bob has his hand up again.
Oh, no, why don't you go ahead and answer, Mark?
Go
I
ahead,
have
go ahead.
something else. Go ahead. Thanks.
So I have a manifesto that is in here, and it's just barely on the web as of this time. So many of you have been to agilemanifesto.org. Okay. That manifesto created what's called a movement, to borrow Seth Godin's term there. It created a tribe, didn't it? So that tribe were called Agile proponents, because rawr, this is a better way. So essentially, the Agile Manifesto has a series of values. We value this over this, where the over this is the status quo, okay? We value this over some other status quo. We value this over this other status quo, and a set of principles. And then those 17 white guys, if you actually pay attention, every single one of them are white and male, or at least seemingly. Obviously, identification, one's own identity might be different. But the point is that there were 17 of them, and all of them were uber smart luminaries in the computer field, specifically software. And they said, we have a different way of thinking and a different way of behaving. And so as part of that movement, they changed the world. Well, I too have a similar idea here. So 17 people will come together. They will be much more diverse than the Agile Manifesto first signers, but these signers will sign an equal opportunity manifesto. And so I think HR people will latch on to this. But how do you actually adopt how do you sign that manifesto is one question, but how do you actually live it? Where the goal is to eliminate those human biases to the extent possible. Okay, to the extent possible. I think HR people everywhere will just get it once this becomes an actual movement.
Yeah. Bob, do you have a question?
Well, I would just comment to what Mark said. Totally agree. And I think, like with dyslexia and even ADHD, when executives were revealing that they found out what was bothering them their whole life because they were helping their kids, that influenced a lot of people to say, hey, wow, they have that and they're doing so well. So I think influencing the executive C-suite folks above HR to get some sponsors there would be even more impactful with the manifesto. But I love the idea totally.
So all 16 of the next signers are going to be influential in whatever country they live in. They'll have the ability to connect with the press. Maybe they'll be CEOs, maybe they'll be singers. I honestly don't care what their background is, but they need to sort of have part of their life purpose be equal opportunity for all.
Yeah.
Because if you solve equal opportunity for all, you solve it for autistic people, people with face tattoos, people that are just different.
Yeah. Now, what about Mark? People recently in the past year came into awareness of people whose certification, training, and profession is applied behavior analysts who work with people on the spectrum. And they usually work through an agency that's a government agency or a private agency. And then there are people who get certified in a specific kind of coaching for spectrum folks. I forget what that's called, but there's only one. It's very prestigious. Do you work with people like that too, influencing them?
So ABA, applied behavioral analysis, the study of behavioral analysis isn't bad. Okay. Now it sounds like I'm going to be judgmental here when I just talked about reducing judgment. But some, okay, I'm just going to phrase it that way because I don't know what the percentages are. Some experts at ABA are not actually helping as much as they think they are. Because some people who experience interactions with ABA do not have good outcomes. And part of that is the strong focus on that medical model where they're so focused on what is the reason for this behavior that's bad, okay, labeling and so on, as opposed to focusing on the strengths, because these folks need a stronger self-esteem. Okay, this is one of the biggest epidemics among autistic people, is that their self-esteem is not where it should be. And so if ABA folks who study behavior would simply focus largely on the strengths and, when necessary, touching on some weaknesses, but building a relationship based on trust is about, saying, oh, you're so talented at this. How can we focus on that? And so on. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it looks like we're getting close to time here. I want to wrap it up by saying there are, according to uh, several articles on the internet, now 30 employers that have specific programs for people with autism in 2020 and beyond. There are tons of groups that are starting to be aware of these neurodiverse issues. There are very few systems that support these issues to date. So one of the things, one of the biggest opportunities in careers for big data and AI and machine learning is to support some of these concepts for some of the biggest companies on the planet: AMC, Autonomy Works, Chevron, CVS, Ernst & Young, Ford, Freddie Mac, Google, Home Depot, HP, JP Morgan, Lowe's, Microsoft, Office Max, Pepsi, Safeway, Salesforce, SAP, and Target, Vodafone, Walgreens, and Walmart, as well as a number of other ones that may be less well known, all hire neurodiverse talent. All have programs for neurodiverse talent. And so there's a wealth of opportunity in this field. We definitely encourage you to explore this field and take some of your computing skills to do a whole lot of good for a lot of people. And Regina, I guess we'll turn it back over to you. Any other things we need to do to wrap it up?
Well, first of all, thank you both, Mark and Marie, for a really fascinating conversation, and looking forward to Marie loading me up with info to stick into the blog there. And beyond that, thank you everybody for joining this evening. Bob, great questions as always. And is it okay if people reach out to you guys, Mark and Marie?
Yeah, for sure.
You bet. And I have a few extra minutes, so if anyone has extra time, I'd be, more than happy to stay and chew the fat.
Okay, we'll give you 5. How's that? Because I don't want to overly tax your time. But then we will shut this down, and then people can reach out to you individually. So I'm going to stop the recording.